In the grim darkness of the future, there is only war. You are one of the Emperor's elite, a space marine tasked with defending the Imperium of man from threats both outside and within. The mutant, the heretic, the alien, all will fall before your wrath. I'm Darcblade, and welcome to this class guide to the Assault Marine in Space Marine 2. In this video we will go over the basics of the class, the weaponry, the best builds, and a little bit of the lore behind the class. So when it comes to the lore of the Assault Marine, much like the Tactical Marine, there could be some confusion, as Assault Marines are first-born Space Marines, whilst in Space Marine 2 we are actually playing as a Primaris Marine, which is indicated by the size of our Marine as well as the armour and helmet they wear. And thus we are playing a Jump Pack Intercessor, in terms of lore and the tabletop. Jump Pack Intercessors are selected from the most aggressive Space Marines in a chapter, at least when it comes to their martial prowess. They pair dizzying close quarters combat skills with lightning fast strikes, utilizing the fully armored Space Marine itself as a weapon, whether they are being used as first strike units to charge into combat or flanking units to take on unaware opponents. They can really make an impact when they leap into combat. The Assault Marine has access to a wide variety of weapons when it comes to close quarters combat, with 3 powerful melee weapons combined with a decent selection of secondary weapons. It will allow you to dish out the Emperor's judgment on foes with extreme prejudice. So the Assault Marine has access to the following. Well, first of all, it has access to no primary weapons. It cannot use these. Instead, it has a bigger variety of secondary and melee weapons. So for your first secondary option, you have access to the bolt pistol, a standard weapon that has no real downsides or upsides. You then have access to the heavy bolt pistol, a wonderful hard-hitting secondary weapon that packs a punch, but has a lower rate of fire than the smaller bolt pistol. Think of it as a high-caliber bolt pistol with strong firepower but smaller magazine sizes. And then finally you have access to the Neo Volkite pistol, a unique weapon that wasn't introduced to the game until further updates. This allows you to fire a beam of thermal damage at opponents that deals constant damage as long as the beam is connecting with said opponent. This of course deals damage, but thermal energy will build up on your opponent, to which after a certain amount of time they will explode, dealing more damage to that opponent as well as any of their allies that are nearby. The accuracy on this weapon is already very high, making this a wonderful choice at taking down ranged opponents, so long as you can keep the thermal beam connected with enemies. When it comes to wave of enemies though, this weapon struggles a little bit, and I would recommend one of the other secondary weapons, or just switch into your melee weapons. And speaking of which, the Assault Marine has access to 3 melee weapons, all very powerful, all very strong. First of all is the Chainsword, the iconic Space Marine weapon, able to cut your way through swarms of enemies or duel harder opponents easily. It's kind of an all-rounder when it comes to melee weapons, and I would recommend taking either the fencing or balanced defense type chainswords. Blocking melee weapons have been changed a little bit with recent updates, but they're still not quite as useful as fencing or balanced weapons. You then have access to the Thunderhammer, an iconic weapon that only the Assault Marine can use at the moment. This is a wave clearing machine, able to defeat multiple opponents as you swing it wildly in front of you. On top of that, you can use the hammer to create AoE effects by slamming it into the ground, allowing for even more wave clearing capabilities. Again, I'd recommend the balance or the fencing Thunderhammer for the best results. And then you have access to the Power Fist, a very strong weapon, but unfortunately is a little bit on the slower side. It is good for dueling and for performing follow-up counterattacks, but it doesn't quite have the wave clearing capabilities of the Thunderhammer. Nonetheless, this weapon is flashy, and if you like a meme weapon as well, I'd strongly recommend the Power Fist. As for the armor the Assault wears, it's equipped with the Mark 10 Tacticus Power Armor, but it obviously has access to the Primaris Intercessor Jump Packs, which are based off of the Mark 10 Gravis Power Armor and the Mark 10 Omnius Power Armor variants, created to lift heavier and bigger Marines into the air. This translates to 3 pips of armor when you're in operations mode. Now, every class in Space Marine has access to a skill that is unique to their class. The Assault Marine has access to the Jump Pack, which can be used in multiple ways. Firstly, it can be used to enhance your dashes and dodges. by pressing the ability button and the direction you desire. This can trigger a perfect dodge and allows you to get a good distance between you and your foes when evading them. It can also be used to launch the Assault Marine high into the air, to which afterwards you'll gain access to the Ground Pound ability, a strong hard-hitting AoE melee attack that launches the assault into opponents for massive damage. By default you have 2 charges of the jump pack, so use these wisely. You can either use both charges on dealing massive AoE damage via the jump pack's ability to do the Ground Pound move, or you could save them to perform the more effective evades depending on the enemy you are fighting. For me personally, because a lot of enemies can be parried and I like to use fencing and balanced weapons, I kind of do half and half, with saving 1 charge for the dodge and 1 for the Ground Pound. But every Astartes can augment their ability via perks. These enable players to create builds for their Space Marines. Now the Assault's default perk, which can be found by hovering over their ability in the perk customization menu, buffs the Intercessor when it comes to perfect dodges, increasing the time to perform said perfect dodges by 50%. Ultimately making perfect dodges, whether you're doing it with your jump pack or the normal perfect dodge, a lot more easy to perform with this class. Moving on to the core perks. Now these are divided into 3 columns. For column 1 you have either Winged Fury, which damage from melee attacks executed while sprinting or dashing. Their damage is increased by 25%, a decent all-round starter perk. You then have Overcharge, which damage from charged melee attacks is increased by 15%. Again, another decent perk, especially if you are using the Thunderhammer. And then you have Armor Reinforcement, which non-finisher gun strikes also restore a segment of armor. This greatly increases the survivability of the Assault Marine, which survival is one of its downsides. So I personally would always recommend taking Armor Reinforcement over the other perks, despite the other perks being decent. For the next column you have Auxiliary Arsenal, to which your secondary weapons damage is increased by 15%. This is good if you're playing a more cautious build, or a build that focuses more on one-on-one dueling than AoE wave clearing. You then have Retribution, which after you are grabbed or knocked back, you deal 15% more melee damage for 10 seconds. And then finally you have Consecutive Execution, to which killing 15 enemies in rapid succession restores 1 equipment charge, so your grenades. But this has a 180-second cooldown. This is great for if you're utilizing AoE with the assault troop and focusing on clearing out waves of the smaller enemies. And then for the final column you have Perseverance, which while performing charged attacks you will not lose control upon taking heavy hits, and you cannot be knocked back. A decent perk, but on the harder difficulties, charging up the heavy attacks can be a little bit of a death sentence. You then have Knowledge of the Enemy, to which melee damage is increased by 15% against Majorist and Extremist level enemies. Again, a decent perk if you're focusing on more of a dueling build with the Assault Marine. And then finally you have Act of Attrition. Enemies hit by melee attacks take 10% more damage for 3 seconds. A decent perk that affects all enemies that you will go up against, and is the preferred perk I like to use because I tend to do a lot of light attacks with certain weapons like the chainsword. Anyway, moving on to the next column, which are your team perks, which are buffs that benefit not only you but your entire team and squad. First of all you have Squad Cohesion, to which all squad members' abilities recharge 10% faster. You then have Strategic Strikes, to which all squad members deal 20% more melee damage against Terminus level enemies, so the boss enemies you would face. A little bit more niche, but it's still useful. And then finally you have Proven Efficiency, to which all squad members deal 50% more gun strike damage to opponents. Personally, depending on who you are playing with, I would either take Squad Cohesion or Proven Efficiency. It's your choice. Now moving on to the gear perks, again there are 3 columns here. Gear perks affect how your jump pack works. First of all, for column 1 you have Smiting Angel, to which your ground pound's damage is increased by 10%, a nice buff to your ground pound attack. You then have Hammer of Wrath, to which after a ground pound you do not lose control upon taking heavy hits, and you cannot be knocked back for 10 seconds. To be honest, if I wanted to focus on not losing control of my character, I would go back to the core perks and take the Perseverance perk. And then finally you have Precision Strike, to which your ground pound deals 100% more damage, but its radius is reduced by 50%. Now for column number 2 you have Wings of Flame, which your jump pack dash damages enemies along its trajectory. So when you use your jump pack to dodge, it will deal damage to enemies along the way. You then have Maneuverability, to which your jump pack recharges 20% faster. This is one of the perks I might recommend depending on how you are playing the Assault. I would take this if you're playing more of a duelist build with this Astartes. And then you have Zealous Blow, which again is a wonderful perk that a ground pound kill will restore your jump packs charged by 10%. To which, if you're playing an AoE wave clearing build with the Assault Marine, this is a wonderful perk and a must have, as you will be able to get your jump pack charges back incredibly quick, as you'll be killing lots of smaller enemies with your ground pound. And then for the third column you have Pride in Duty, to which after a finisher your ground pound deals 25% more damage for 10 seconds. This synergizes well with the AoE ground pound build, as normally I would recommend trying to get a finisher first before taking to the skies and performing your ground pounds over and over again. This means that your ground pounds will have that increased damage, which in turn will feed into Zealous Blow, allowing you to recharge your jump pack charges even quicker. You'll then have Diligence, to which a fully prepared ground pound deals 20% more damage, but the preparation time is increased by 25%. This is risky, as you can be shot out the sky quite easily when performing this. I would skip over this one in all honesty. And then finally you have Aerial Grace, to which after performing a perfectly timed dodge using the jump pack, you'll deal 25% more damage for 5 seconds. I would recommend taking this one if you're utilizing a duelist build, but it is risky to pull off, as if you mistime the dodge with your jump pack, you won't get the damage increase and you'll be down a jump pack charge. So unfortunately you have to train yourself a little bit to use this one effectively. And then finally for the signature perks, which are perks that either benefit the jump pack, the ability of whatever class you are playing, or the basics of the class. First of all, you have Ample Ammunition, to which when using the jump pack, it will reload your secondary weapon. A lot of the weapons already have perks that reload your weapon automatically, so I skip over this one. You then have Ascension, to which when you leap to the air using the jump pack, it will deal damage to all enemies in the takeoff area. This can be useful if you're using the AoE build. And then finally you have Commitment, to which a perfectly timed dodge using the jump pack's dash restores a jump pack ability charge. So this combined with the Aerial Grace perk means that you can potentially, if you're timing your dodges with your jump pack correctly, you can keep using it over and over again and get the Aerial Grace damage buff. But it is easier said than done, and I would probably recommend it mainly for duelist builds. But when taking on the enemies of the Imperium, you can be more effective when you specialize in certain weapons and perks, thus creating builds. I will be showing off 2 builds that I use for the Assault Marine that are aimed at taking on the harder difficulties in Space Marine 2's Operation Mode. Now the 2 builds I tend to use are the AoE Ground Pound build and the Duelist build. One is focused on wave clearing and taking out waves of smaller opponents. The other is focused on dealing with Majoris or higher level enemies, bringing them down fairly quickly with dodges, parries and counter attacks. Now before going into the perks for each build, we'll quickly go over the weapons. When it comes to your secondary weapon, in all honesty, this is down to personal preference, but I personally would go with either the heavy bolt pistol or the Neo Volkite pistol, picking the ones that either have the highest accuracy to counter the shortcomings when it comes to the assault at dealing damage at range, or taking the ones that have the highest ammo reserve, as you will burn through ammo very quickly on the harder difficulties. So for the perks, when it comes to the heavy bolt pistol, I'd first recommend going for Great Might to increase damage against Terminus level enemies. I'll then go for Death Strike, to which after killing a Majoris level enemy or higher with a melee weapon, which we should be doing a lot, will deal 25% more damage for 5 seconds. So after we finish off an enemy in melee, if there's no one else around in melee, we can focus on a ranged opponent and fire off a few rounds that have increased damage. I then take Close Combat, to which enemies at a distance of more than 15 meters take 10% more damage. I then focus on Perpetual Precision, to which the maximum spread is decreased by 10%. I then have Perpetual Penetration, to which our shots will penetrate 1 additional target. I then have Gunstrike Reload, to which after a gun strike, the equipped secondary weapon instantly reloads. I've then gone for Headhunter to increase the damage of headshots by 10%. I've then gone down for Extended Magazine to increase the magazine capacity. I've then gone over for another Headhunter to increase the damage of headshots. And then finally I've taken Adamant Hunter, to which when our health is below 30%, headshots will deal 25% more damage. Now, when it comes to the Neo Volkite pistol, I'd recommend taking the one that has the highest ammo reserve, much for the same reasons as we mentioned in the heavy bolt pistol. But as for the weaponry, first of all, I'd take extended magazine to increase the magazine size by 15%. I'll then take combustive momentum, to which after a gun strike, the heating speed of the weapon is increased by 30% for 2 seconds. We've then gone for increased capacity, to which the ammo reserve of this weapon is increased by 20%. I've then gone over to Volkite discharge area, to which the Volkite discharge area of the explosion it causes is expanded by 20%. I've then gone for accelerated combustion, to which the heating speed again is increased by 20%, so we can heat up opponents to cause that AoE blast more quickly. I've then gone for violent deflagration, to which after killing a Majora's level enemy or higher with a melee weapon, the heating speed is again increased by 30% for 2 seconds. And then finally I've gone for distributed deflagration, which along with the Volkite's explosion, 25% of the heat is also transferred to surrounded opponents. But like I said, when it comes to your secondary weapons, your ranged weapons, they are kind of down to personal preference, so go with what best suits your playstyle. But when it comes to the melee weapons, now I would recommend either the chainsword or the thunderhammer in all honesty. The power fist is good and can be useful on the duelist build, but for the most part I've had better results using the thunderhammer for the AoE ground pound build and the chainsword for the duelist build. The main reason I'm taking the chainsword over the power fist is it is easier to stagger Majora's level opponents with the chainsword combos than it is the power fist combos. As I mentioned before, try to take your balanced or your fencing weapons, as even with the buffs to the blocking weapons, I still think balanced and fencing are more optimal. So, when it comes to the chainsword, first of all you want to take perpetual strength to increase the melee damage by 5%. You'll then take swift recovery, to which heavy attacks restore 100% more contested health with certain attacks. You'll then have another perpetual strength to increase the melee damage by a further 5%. I've then gone for Swordblade, to which the light combo's length is increased from 4 to 5. I've then gone for Tyrannid Slayer to increase the damage against Tyrannids by 10%. Next up is Minoris Slayer, which increases damage against Minoris level enemies by 20%. I've then gone for Full Throttle, to which the punch move is replaced with the Full Throttle move, so you can hold up the attack to increase the damage of the follow-up strike by 100% per 1 second it's held. I've then gone for Extremist Slayer to increase the damage against Extremist level enemies by 15%, and then finally I've gone for Majora's Slayer to increase the damage against Majora's level enemies by 10%. As for the Thunderhammer, again focused or balanced, and then you want to go for Perpetual Strength to increase the melee damage by 5%. You'll then go for Fast Preparation, to which the aftershock preparation time is reduced by 30%. I've then gone for Perpetual Strength again to increase the damage of our melee attacks. Another Perpetual Strength. I've then gone for Shattering Impact, to which the ground slam area of effect is increased by 50%, helping with our AoE damage. I've then gone for Seismic Chain, to which after performing a ground slam, hold the attack button to perform an additional ground slam, allowing you to perform 2 quick consecutive AoE attacks in a row. I've then gone for another Perpetual Strength. Next up is Kill Streak, to which after killing 10 enemies in rapid succession with light combos, you do not lose control upon taking heavy hits and you cannot be knocked back for 5 seconds, but this has a cooldown of 10 seconds. I've then gone for Aftershock Improved, to which Aftershock gains an additional smash. I've then gone for Minoris Slayer to increase damage against Minoris level enemies, and then Majora's Slayer to increase damage against Majora's level enemies. But as for the perk combinations we use for each build, first of all we'll talk about the AoE ground pound build, to which for your core perks, for column 1, you'll want to take Armor Reinforcement to help our survivability. You'll then want to take Consecutive Execution, because we will be killing a lot of little enemies quite quickly, thus allowing us to potentially restore our grenades. And then I'll take Act of Retribution, to which enemies hit by melee attacks take 10% more damage for 3 seconds. You can replace this if you wanted to with Knowledge of the enemy, but the choice is up to you. As for your team perks, I'd recommend taking Proven Efficiency to increase the gun strike damage of all squad members by 50%. Squad Cohesion can also be a good choice depending on what other classes are in the group with you, so everyone's abilities come off cooldown quicker. It's a choice between increasing everyone's damage or utility. I personally go for the gun strike damage, as the assault utilizes a lot of moves that synergize well with the gun strike. For your gear perks, for column 1, I first recommend either taking Smiting Angel to increase the damage of the ground pound by 10%, or Precision Strike to increase the ground pound damage by 100%, but we have to deal with the radius being reduced by 50%. This is down to personal preference and depends on how many Majoris level enemies you're going to be up against when facing the waves. If there's a lot of them, I'd recommend Precision Strike. If there's not so many of them, take Smiting Angel. Next up, for the column 2, you got to take Zealous Blow, to which a ground pound kill will restore our jump pack charge by 10%. We should be getting lots of kills with our ground pounds, as we will be focusing on taking on Minoris level enemies and removing them with our ground pound attacks. Thus they'll feed into Zealous Blow, allowing us to recharge our jump pack very quickly, potentially allowing us to go up and down over and over again on them, so long as Majoris level enemies are within range. And then finally for column 3, I'd recommend taking Pride in Duty, to which after a finisher, your ground pound damage deals 25% more damage for 10 seconds. If you can get a finisher before taking to the skies, this in turn will increase the damage of our ground pound and thus feed it into Zealous Blow, allowing us to recharge our jump pack very quickly. And then finally for the signature perk, I'd recommend taking Ascension, to which jump pack leaps will deal damage in the takeoff area. Like I said, this is a fun build when it comes to wave clearing. If you have members of your team who are better at taking out individual targets, such as the sniper who can remove those extremists, or Majoris level enemies quite quickly, then this AoE ground pound build is fantastic at reducing the larger waves of weaker opponents. It's also one of the most cathartic builds to play, as there is something incredibly fun about utilizing the jump pack to perform the ground pounds over and over again. But what if you want to play something different? Well, there is also the Duelist build, which specializes on utilizing the dodge dash with the jump pack and take on the harder enemies such as Majoris, Extremis and Terminus level enemies. You'll still be decent at dealing with waves, but your attention will be set more on higher priority targets. So for the core perks on column 1, you'll want Armor Reinforcement to help get your armor back when performing gun strikes. You'll then want to take Auxiliary Arsenal to increase our pistol's damage by 15%. We won't be killing enough in quick succession to really take advantage of consecutive execution to get our grenades back, and with Retribution we don't want to be hit in the first place. Auxiliary Arsenal will also be useful when it comes to dealing with enemies like Zoanthropes who are out of melee range. And then finally for column 3, you want to take Active Attrition to debuff enemies so they take more melee damage. As for your team perks, again you want to take Proven Efficiency to increase the damage of gun strikes, but if you're not confident enough with your abilities to perform perfect dodges with your jump pack dash, you can take Squad Cohesion to allow you and all your members' abilities to cool down 10% faster. As for the gear perks, I'd recommend taking Precision Strike to increase the ground pound damage by 100%, but reduces the radius by 50%, but as we are focusing on taking on higher priority targets, so normally one-on-ones, the reduction in radius is negligible and the increase of damage is substantial. As for column 2, you want to take Maneuverability, to which the jump pack recharges 20% more quickly. I've taken this more as a safety net for if I mess up the jump pack perfect dodge, but if you're exceedingly confident in your abilities, you can take Wings of Flame to damage opponents along your trajectory when performing that jump pack dodge. And then finally, for column 3, you want to take Aerial Grace, to which after a perfectly timed dodge with your jump pack, your damage will be increased by 25% for 5 seconds. This will normally apply to our gun strike and any follow-up melee attack, and is a buff that is definitely noticeable. As for your signature perk, you want to take Commitment, to which after a perfectly timed dodge using the jump pack dash, it will restore the jump pack's ability charge. So as long as we're dodging and performing the perfect dodge with the jump pack, we should never lose a jump pack charge. Again, like I said before, when it comes to this build, I tend to save one of the jump pack charges for the dodge and the other for the ground pound, and I rotate according to how the duel is going against my opponent. Now this is a fun build, but I will put a warning out that it does take a little bit of time to get used to, as in Space Marine 2 it tends to be easier to perform parries than it is perfect dodges, especially perfect jump pack dodges. Nonetheless, if you're able to adjust your muscle memory, you'll find that this build is actually incredibly strong for the Assault Marine and dealing with higher priority targets. But every Astartes out there comes with various pros and cons. No Marine is absolutely perfect, despite what the Imperium will say. When it comes to the Assault, its biggest pro is its wave clearing abilities. The ground pound combined with the weapons it has in its arsenal, it's able to handle waves of weaker opponents with ease. On top of that, the next pro is the jump pack itself, able to provide the Assault with a powerful AoE ground pound attack, but also an enhanced dodge mechanic. And then the final pro for the Assault, which is kind of personal in a way, personal preference, is this class has the wow factor. It's incredibly cathartic to play and has access to some of the flashiest moves and weapons in the game. But of course there are cons. The biggest being survivability. Unfortunately, because you are diving into combat a lot, or you feel the need to dive into combat a lot, you can sometimes rush ahead and the entire enemy force will focus on you, bringing you down quickly. So you have to curb your enthusiasm a little bit and attack in unison with your allies for best results. Being able to restore your armor via a gun strike does counter this a little bit, but it is still an issue and something you need to be aware of. And finally, the other con for the Assault is it is lacking when it comes to ranged damage. If you're going up against opponents who you cannot combat in close quarters, the Assault struggles a little bit. Zoanthropes, Neurothropes, they can be a nightmare for this class. But that is why we bring Battle Brothers into operations with us, as they can cover our shortcomings whilst we cover theirs. But if you're looking for an incredibly fun class to play, but it does struggle on the harder difficulties a little bit, I will warn you, I'd recommend the Assault. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a class guide and build guide to the Assault Marine in Space Marine 2. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.
Detonation in 5. Brace for shockwave. Doubtful.